matters. This afternoon, Dean Akers is going to share the results of her reflections on a multi-year study of women and street vendors in the Philippines that culminated in her new book, published in 2021, Urban Environments and Health in the Philippines. We are very fortunate to have Dean Akers with us. She is the first Asian American woman and the first Filipino-American lead in the College of Environmental Design. This afternoon, she's going to touch on issues of transdisciplinarity in formal cities from a decolonizing lens and the interplay of physical space, health, history, and behavior. You will help me welcome Dean Mary Anne Akers.
Thank you very much, Andy, and thanks for the mic. It always happens to me. Anyway, thank you everyone for being here. I know it's a very busy Wednesday, it's Thursday afternoon, so I appreciate the time that you're spending here. So I'm just gonna go through this book. Because we're very visual as designers and planners. So rather than read, I did cut and paste for you so you can read with me. So we'll start with, that's where I come from. It's called Baguio City. The Baguio mountains of my youth beckons, a persistent, gentle tapping on my memory's soul. Spirits of wind, water, earth, and sky whisper in silence, come back to us. The melodious call of pine trees bristle. I listen with my heart to the city's rhythms, harmonies that resonate in my conscious dreams. For these chants carry the mythical urban ballads of my youth, echoing their truths, permeating into my being. As my memory breathes these all in, I am transformed once again. The Cordillera spirits are calling. I am reminded that I am a child of the mountains. So those who don't know where the Philippines is, the Philippines is right across the world, actually. And it's an archipelago of 7,107 islands on a low tide, 7,106 on a high tide. So we are an archipelago. Baguio City is north of the capital city, which is Manila. And it is, as I mentioned, a mountain city, initially designed, I wouldn't say initially, but designed by Daniel Burnham. But we all know that indigenous people were there way before the Americans came. So let me just read about how I got involved with vendors. So my interest in women vendors stemmed from a memorable connection with them. They saved me when I was about 2 or 3 years old. One day as a young child, I got lost in the market. My parents told the story that I followed one of our sales girls out of the store, but she was unaware that I was behind her. The only memory I have of that day was the sun beaming on me, and I was surrounded with an abundance of sounds and colors. Excuse me. Apparently, I lost sight of our sales girl, and my wailing cry caught the attention of several vendors. They immediately came to the rescue. These women recognized me as my mother's child because she was their suki, which is regular customer in Tagalog. This is an example of how friendly, informal associations between customers and vendors exceed the economic exchange between parties. Such situation depicts the life worlds of vendors in Baguio City. So again, that's an early childhood memory I have. And for some reason, I'm always drawn to informal street vendors. So this writing journey started, I think in 2019. So from the time that I wrote the proposal to Rutledge, to when the actual book was in my hands took about a year and a half. And through this writing journey, over and above my deanship, but I am a believer of co-working spaces because that's where I wrote. I couldn't write it in my office. I couldn't write it in my home because just too much distraction. So I paid to rent a co-working space when I was still in Baltimore. And that's the place where I would spend my evenings and my weekends for many months writing this. But through this journey, I would say 4 prominent themes came out: decolonization, transdisciplinarity, reading the city, and the creation of an urban tool that I call urban place node, and women as place makers, because usually women in the global south, even here, are invisible, but they are actually the ones that make these places alive and make them really good spaces for economic gain. So let's start with decolonization. It's the process of deconstructing colonial ideologies of the superiority and privilege of Western thought and approaches. On the one hand, decolonization involves dismantling structures that perpetuate the status quo and addressing unbalanced power dynamics. On the other hand, decolonization involves valuing and revitalizing indigenous knowledge and approaches and weeding out secular biases or assumptions that have impacted indigenous ways of being. For non-indigenous people, decolonization is a process of examining your beliefs about indigenous peoples and culture by learning about yourself in relationship to the communities where you live and the people with whom you interact. Although I grew up in a mountain city in the Philippines, I am not necessarily one of the indigenous people who actually come from the tribal communities there. My father and his family migrated from the lowlands, but I call Baguio City as my hometown because that's where I was born and that's where I grew up. Authentic decolonization starts at childhood. And the reason I chose this picture, that's my mom and me, and that's our front yard, which is a hill. And oftentimes my friends and other family friends would say, why are you putting that native hut? I mean, that's, you know, all the other nice houses and lawns are, or front lawns are flat with grass and flowers, but why are you putting that native hut? And so we were put down. But my dad, again, it starts from childhood, wanted to celebrate what native is. And so he put several of these huts up, 3 to represent each of us kids. Again, it starts from childhood. If you notice in this picture on the right, behind my dad is another picture of, again, native huts made of straw and made of straw and bamboo. And so again, even as a child, I grew up to celebrating what's native. All the other homes were very Western. And so they both my mom and dad made sure that we knew where our roots were. I showed this picture in the middle because they also told us kids, don't be normal, break from the mold. And so all my other friends, as I mentioned, were very highly Westernized. Of course, we were also Westernized because we were colonized by the Americans and the Spaniards, but they said, you need to have your own perspective. And so from childhood, we knew we were not normal. This is just a graphic picture of Philippine history. And in the history books of the Philippines, if you notice, and on the iris from 1521 to 1946, and I come from, or I studied in a very progressive and almost revolutionary university called the University of the Philippines. But even in our history classes, it was from 1521 and 1946 that was talked about. And what was that period? That was when Spain colonized us and when the Americans came and when they left in 1946. But that was our history lesson. So talk about Western orientation. All the thousands of years before 1521 were never talked about. Or if they were like a few pages only. And I remember, it's like, wow. So we had to learn colonial history, even in our history books. The Spaniards, I mentioned, they colonized the Philippines for more than 300 years. That's why our names, our lifestyle are very, very Hispanic. My name, Alabanza, is Hispanic. And so they brought with them the Catholic religion. And then the Americans came. And again, that was part of the Treaty of Paris, where Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines were then given to the United States. So the American government came with education. They came with improvement of health conditions. They came with infrastructure. They built roads. They built schools. They built buildings. But look at this picture here. This is one on the right. That's Uncle Sam bathing the brown Filipino child and saying first bath because they wanted to erase our brownness. But what's interesting about this picture are these two Filipinos, brown Filipinos at the back of Uncle Sam. Actually, now there are many interpretations of this visual image. Some said, oh, so the brown Filipinos behind are now taking Uncle Sam's clothes. But other people said, well, they're actually getting one over Uncle Sam. So however you would like to interpret that, but it really shows again that the Americans came and they wanted to be our saviors. Brown Skin, White Minds, very powerful book by a psychologist, a Filipino psychologist. And I remember growing up, and many of those who came before me, the Thomasites, who were the first teachers in the Philippines when the Americans came, again, taught us American culture. I remember as a young child, when we learned the alphabet, A always stood for apples. And we never grow apples in the Philippines. That's not a typical fruit. And I remember S, snow. And snow, it's like, snow, what does it look like? All we know is that was white. And in fact, when I went to Michigan State in 1984, my first snow experience, I thought that it was so pure and all that. So I started, just eating the snow, and somebody had to tell me, don't eat the snow. Oh my gosh, that's so polluted. But again, colonial mentality, the American mind, S is for snow. Decolonizing process. Strong sentiments reverberate about how the West desires, extracts, and claims ownership to colonize people's ways of knowing and the myriad of things they create. But then at the same time, the West rejects them and deny opportunities to center these local cultures in their everyday lives. I know for a fact, when researchers, particularly American researchers, come to the Philippines, they extract data. They interview people. They go to the historical archives, extract data. But then when it's a Filipino who does that and presents here in the United States, we're oftentimes not seen as the expert. It's the white person who goes to the Philippines and extracts these. And I remember, because there was one time, and this was just a few years ago, when I was presenting about Daniel Burnham and his history in Baguio City. And I remember another professor mentioned that he has done research as well. And so during that particular session, the audience, who was mostly American audience, white American audience, were actually asking this person questions about the Philippines and making me look like I was invisible and that my knowledge was not up to par than the person who was not even presenting, but who was just in the audience. That's, again, I had to go through a process to decolonize. As I reimagine the robust quantitative and qualitative data, as well as personal memories and observations, I can offer, as an authentic researcher of the place, a richer and deeper perspective of Baguio City's women's vendor and the relationship between urban environments and their health. Through my decolonization journey, I've come to trust in a natural, unrushed transformation that requires careful assessment and intentional actions to shape my worldview. I do not blindly follow the rhetoric that permeates academic discourse and social media, but as a pragmatic urban planner, I process various points of view, ponder their applicability and relevancy to situations in the Philippines, and then claim my position in the discourse. And writing this book has really helped me look at materials that we have learned as even a graduate student about what urban theory is. And I really it took me a lot of pondering, a lot of assessing which of these theories should I really accept as applicable to the Philippine situation. I know that I started off with, I would say, more than 200 citations. And again, mostly extractive publications who were researchers really not of the place. And again, these were theories that I learned from the beginning of my urban planning journey. And I had to take away a lot of that from the book. But I started with that. So that's part of the process. And the writing journey helped me decolonize. Research authenticity is very important. In the critical analysis and interpretation of places, one ought to consider the role and positionality that the researcher plays in forming a perspective and constructing knowledge. Often, this is important. In the early phase of my academic experience, I carried insecurities about my value as a Filipina researcher. Again, that story that I told you about me being the presenter, but somebody else was considered the expert in the field. That was part of my insecurity, but part of the decolonization process here is knowing where your position is. You don't have to all the time, just because professors say you have to do this, or this famous scholar said this is the citation you have to use. I intentionally made sure that I evaluated and assessed all that I actually cited in my book. Let's go to the study of the women vendors. So that decolonization process actually took place. Even up to now, you can never say I'm a decolonized scholar. It's a journey and it keeps evolving. So the longitudinal study of street vendors started in 1999. At first, I thought, oh, I just want to know about the relationship of the built environment and people. I wanted to know why do women street vendors locate where they uh, find their spots, their vending spots, and then study those places. What were those places about? I didn't know. It was not the plan to actually carry this on as a longitudinal study to 2009, but it did for 10 years. So again, this comes the various aspects, multifaceted aspects of the study. So the research focus was locational choice in 99, vendor relationships in 2001, because we found out that the informal vendors actually had really good relationships with the stores that were behind them or that were nearby. And then in 2003, we studied the health conditions. And then 2005, air quality, 2006, more health conditions, where we actually had vendors. We had case studies of 10 vendors who went to the hospital, and we had a local doctor actually do a medical protocol to look at their health conditions. And then in 2009, we studied also more vendor behavior and street life. So in all these different layers of the study, various methods were used. And unit of analysis were mostly vendors and streets. So here's the concept of transdisciplinarity. So you have here where disciplines are siloed, multidisciplinary, where sociologists say this, but you don't really interact with them, for example. Interdisciplinary is there's more interaction and there is overlapping of thought and ideas. In transdisciplinary, it's blending of ideas where various disciplines come together and stew their thoughts and stew their concepts to study a particular concept or a particular place in this study. So transdisciplinary is written all over the book. Transdisciplinarity requires time and stewing. It just doesn't happen overnight. A lot of arguments. We were, and my husband and I and our daughter actually accompanied me in all these various phases of the study, but we really had a lot of arguments with air scientists because they wanted things to be so precise. We also had some arguments, obviously, with some economists, but that's what transdisciplinary is. It is, again, stewing. And unless you go through this grinding, something, the level of discourse does not reach transdisciplinarity. Okay, wait. One thing about transdisciplinarity as compared to interdisciplinarity, transdisciplinarity implies that there is either a new innovative theory or perspective or tool that comes out of the interaction. And I'll talk more about that. But the research areas, we had economists, we had sociologists, we had psychologists, we had geographers helping us, vending history, business people, health conditions, we had medical conditions, air quality, I talked about that. Anthropologists were also part of our team. So the methods, we did observations, we did surveys, we have more than, I would say, 3,000 data points in this entire 10-year study. We did site documentations where we measured the sidewalks, we measured the buildings, we really looked even at the materiality of the buildings, we looked at land use, personal interviews, we did that a lot, visual documentation, case studies, behavior tracking, and medical biometrics, which again is transdisciplinarity. That's when all these different methods of research come together. So we had social scientists, I was saying, environmental scientists, nurses, doctors, health researchers, medical students, and of course, me, the urban planner. And what came out of this? The concept of urban place node. What is that? It's an intensified focal space that mark the intersectionality of place, people, and health. When you study urban environments, oftentimes, like in this particular situation, one street had its own character, and streets are not all the same, are not people, for example, do not behave in all the streets the same way. Everything is different. The vendors, for example, you know where to go if you want to go for peanuts. If you want to go for cheap socks, you know where to go. So the urban place node is just this layering of the different aspects of urban life and urban dynamics. So the urban place node is what came out of this process. It's a valuable transdisciplinary tool. It's new. It's not necessarily used by a lot of planners, because planners tend to, it's easier to say all the streets are like this, but to actually look at the nuances of each street or each node requires a lot of time and a lot of digging into different aspects of urban life. Okay, the street speaks with multicolored signs, asymmetrical overhangs, retail fixtures extending over the sidewalk, vendors and their wares. No street is the same. And that's what the urban place node actually brings about, is a different way of looking at spots in an urban landscape. There were 5 urban nodes, and I'll just go through each of these and how different they are. Upper Session Road, do you notice that these women are carrying this, well, there was another one over here, this bag. This bag is a plastic bag that has shoe mark SM on its front, and there's this big conglomerate of a supermarket, superstore, like your Walmart's here, but we call it Shoe Mart. And the Shoe Mart is way up here, but you will see a lot of people, pedestrians, walking from Shoe Mart going down to where they're going to catch their jeepneys. This street also is very different, because when Christmas season comes, I don't know if it's clear here, but these are Christmas wrappers. If you want to go for Christmas shopping, it's this node where you'll go, not close to the market. So that's one node. Abanao Street is another node that we studied. You have vendors carrying their wares. And again, the relation in this node, vendors had to carry their wares every day. And these are older women. But in other nodes, because of the relationship of the vendors with the formal businesses, most of the time the store owners would actually keep their goods, and then the next day they give them back to the vendors. So it all depends again on your node. It's not the same all throughout. Now, what are some health hazards here? If you notice, here is a trash can, but a vendor, street vendor, yeah, I think she's selling fruit and vegetables here. And that's a health hazard when you look at it, because obviously here's your trash can and you're talking about fruit here, but to the vendor, that's very convenient, because when they peel the fruit, it goes straight to the trash can. So it doesn't happen in all the nodes. It doesn't happen in all the streets. Oops. This young man, for example, here's corn, right? And normally when they sell corn, they would open up the corn and then throw the what do you call that? The husk. They'll throw the husk right there into the garbage can. Not necessarily very sanitary, but This node has a lot of those, not in the other nodes. Very typical of this node are the overhangs, not overhangs, but passageways, because the pedestrian traffic was very intense here, and the city government decided, well, let's separate the vehicular traffic from the pedestrian traffic. Here's another example of a vendor with peanuts, selling peanuts, and then eggs, boiled eggs over here. Again, the concept, the Western concept of edges, urban edges. I learned that from way back in the 70s when I was in college. Urban edges. Well, here in a lot of global South streets, there are no urban edges, because oftentimes pedestrians and vendors go beyond the sidewalk. Very typical of global streets. General Luna, another node. Again, here are some vendors who decided that school children were their major markets. So they would come in with toys and a lot of candy and sweets and all that. And they would always wait for the dismissal of school, so that they immediately harness all their customers. Here's another vendor. Talk about edges. Look, this they're selling pork barbecue, but they have gone beyond the sidewalk. So where's your edge there? But this is also a hangout of teenagers that come from college nearby. Again, very different from, let's say, another node where most of the pedestrians were just adults going to their jeepney stops. I talked about the vendor who sold socks. Not all vendors sold socks. This particular vendor, and people know where to go to, what node to go to. Garbage, very big problem. But I noticed the difference between the garbage in Baguio City and the garbage here in the United States. You would see in a lot of urban places where trash is just all over, right? All over, just scattered. Here in Baguio City, for some reason, again, pedestrian behavior, we don't have necessarily trash cans. It's only in that particular node that I showed that we have trash cans. But look here, they know that there's a dump. Somebody would just start to throw one trash in one side. Before you know it, it's a heap, because people just don't walk and throw. They look for nodes like this, garbage nodes. Problem with this is it builds up, and unlike here, we don't they don't dispose of waste every day. Sometimes it takes 3 days, and so you can imagine bacteria and rats and other rodents infecting this place. But it's interesting, because pedestrian behavior is they just don't throw anywhere. They look for a heap of garbage, and then they just keep piling over. Okay, so this is the end. My conclusion: at the end of writing a book, one always reflects on how the project unfolded and what lessons can be gleaned from the process. The initial purpose of the book was to describe, analyze, and structure the multi-year study of women vendors, almost like a research paper, very structured: hypothesis, literature review, methodology, results, and then conclusion. But fortunately, it was early on that I decided against such structure. The book's substance flowed from a deep commitment to give voice to the women vendors who gave up their time and narratives all these years. So it's not a research book like a research paper. Furthermore, the writing process presented an opportunity to decolonize the way of interpreting the multi-studies results, Rather than engaging in a non-critical reading of the updated literature, I intentionally peeled off and uncovered the layers of Western thinking from the perspective of the colonized. So after a thorough study of the traditionally cited literature, including critiques of these materials, I selected only the appropriate ones that express views representing the other. It was refreshing and liberating to immerse myself in the process, an experience that was long overdue. That's my conclusion. Thank you. Oh, have any questions or comments or thoughts?
Yeah, we have time for questions if you want. We have to use the microphone so that they can hear us on. Oh, Panda.
Hey everyone, I'm Panda, him, his pronouns. I'm the coordinator at the Native American Student Center. Sorry, I'm getting emotional. I appreciate your perspective and your approach, because this is a very beautiful approach to research that in a way that just totally challenges our institutions and the way we think about the quote unquote legitimate research, right? Especially in the context of Indigenous perspectives, right? And decolonizing our perspectives on research and things like that. And I also can't help but think of LA. Downtown LA, we have our districts, we have our flower district, our fashion district, and now I think of them as nodes, right? So
Yeah. Oh yeah.
they're exactly that, exactly what you're displaying there. You go to this specific node, this specific district for those specific vendors, for this specific experience, right? And so it's wonderful to see the parallels in our communities. And downtown LA is filled with Indigenous peoples, from many different areas. And so it again, it's almost a recurring theme in Indigenous communities to I guess form in the way that they do, and so I appreciate this, and thank you again for
Sure.
sharing with us.
Yes, thank you very much. And I would hope, so don't give me more work, hint, hint, as a team. Yeah, I wanna advance the concept of the urban place node and how planners can use this actually, rather than doing a generic solution to all urban streets, but to really study each node and have different not treatments, but different interventions for those nodes. So I'll have to look for a co-working space somewhere so I can write. Do you have those here? Oh, you do? Ah, okay. Oh, and the pack. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
I'm gonna go with our
Okay.
new ENV
Yes.
resource library.
Hi, everyone. Hi, I'm Raheem Eskridge. I'm the new ENV librarian. It's nice to see everybody. First of all, amazing presentation. Thank you so much for that. I really liked your commentary on colonization and decolonization. Given your experience writing, researching, and decolonizing during this book and during your educational career, how has that experience impacted your deanship? And how will that impact the communications and the styles that you encourage of the faculty in your department?
Whoa, that's a loaded question, but I love it. And you're on point. I think my way of, again, the process, because I'm continuing to decolonize, but centering the voices of students, of staff, of faculty who have not been heard before, to me is extremely important. That's why I'm here. And so that's one of the, and I'll tell you a secret, but it's not a secret anymore. That's why I need a co-working space. I'm looking at another book, writing another book on leadership. And guess what? I have a whole bunch of leadership material. I may have to throw many of them out because again, it's leading while brown. and how a dean, I come from an HBCU, how a dean, a brown dean, not survived, but my experience, my journey in a Black environment, for example, was that was part of my decolonizing journey, because I had to really look also at historical conditions. And so identity, cultural identity is extremely important for our students, for our faculty, for our staff to survive in this world. And that's why when the students came up with an open letter about wanting the curriculum to be a little more decolonized and bring in, center more theories, more concepts, more experiences, more stories of people who look like them, is extremely important. And that's what a deanship is about. It's not the everyday, well, of course it's the everyday, we have to make the college run, but that's the framework that I use in my deanship. Pat. Yay, my friend Pat.
Hi, I'm Pat Hawthorne. I'm the Dean of the Library. I'm curious if you've communicated back the results of your research to the vendors and what has been that dialogue.
I love that question. Because when I started the book, I said, this has got to get back to Baguio. It cannot not be again, or I would be like the other extractive researchers who get knowledge and that's it. I'm sorry to say, but the book is very expensive. I did not know that when I started reading and when I writing and when I signed a commitment with Rutledge. But I have done, it may not directly reach the vendors, but the vendors' conditions, because I have been also giving lectures and book talks, thanks to Zoom, to the planners over there, to the nonprofits who work with micro enterprises and the vendors. So it may not necessarily reach them directly, but hopefully change will come, because right now in the Philippines, the way to treat the informal sector, street vendors, sweep them out, and they literally sweep them out. But that's their livelihood, and very Western way of dealing with street vendors is put them in markets, centralize them in markets. And they did that. And they had a night market in Baguio where they said, vendors, we will sweep you off the streets, but we have a night market for you. But guess what? It costs to rent a tent from them because it has to look nice. And then it's only open from 9 p.m. at night to 12 midnight. These vendors are in there. They start at 5 o'clock in the morning and continue until 10. Because there are waves of customers. So they lost the fight there. So what they did was, instead of in the downtown, they would vend in their neighborhoods instead. But your market demand in the neighborhood is not as much as in the downtown. So there are advocacy groups that have actually rallied with the local government about, including them. Now, there should be some rules. I believe in rules, but you should not take out informality, because that's the way a lot of low income vendors earn their living. And many of these women are single headed households. So, yeah. Yeah, Larissa. Oh, and Chris back there too.
And so you had reported back to the vendors, I believe, multiple times, right?
I have talked to the vendors back after this.
My
Yes.
question was, when you showed Mary Anne Shoe Mart, and how kind of an impact has Shoe Mart had on the vendors in terms of their income? Do you think that has impacted their livelihood?
Yes, to a certain extent, but to a certain extent, yes, but Shoe Mart, the type of products that they have are not necessarily the day-to-day products that the vendors vend. So to a certain extent, but I have also noticed that in fact, Shoe Mart sometimes brings people to the downtown when before you wouldn't get that volume of people. And so it would then the demand go to the vendors. And that's one of those benefits of that Shoe Mart, but it's a big conglomerate enterprise in the Philippines. So
Okay, we have two questions from the Q&As from the virtual. So the first one is from Sora Baik, who says, I am curious to know more about your findings about the built environment characteristics where street vendors by women are placed and how the findings would have been different if you had not decolonized your process lens in analyzing data.
yeah. Ooh, another good question. Ooh, these are all good questions. Okay, so again, with the decolonizing lens or perspective, I started off the research with, again, your typical Kevin Lynch. Who else did I? Yeah, Kevin Lynch particularly, talking about nodes and talking about what are the 5 different forms, urban forms. I started with that, but then I started finding out that that does not necessarily apply to many of the streets in the global South. So that's where I had to peel off that lens of, okay, I need to look for this particular form in the landscape. I had to peel that off and instead look at the different streets and the different nodes for its uniqueness, for their uniqueness and their particular dynamic and interplay of various factors. That's the decolonizing part of looking at the built environment. Because there are, for example, there are some nodes that have a lot of symbols and signs that others wouldn't necessarily have. If I did not decolonize, you know how I would assess those nodes? I would say, it's messy. You cannot read the landscape because there's no pattern. But then, again, because of this decolonizing journey process, I said, there are patterns, but they are not those neatly organized patterns, but there are patterns. So that's how I study the built environment.
Okay, there's 2 more questions from Dr.
Uh-oh.
Huerta.
And then Larissa, oh, Alvaro.
Yes. Okay, so his first question is, how do street vendors from other parts of the world transform their skills in this country when they migrate? And his second question, if you formalize the informal economy, what would happen to those who don't assimilate?
Okay. First of all, what happens to those skills that they bring here, like immigrants who come here to this country? Well, I think they do hone those skills here. Why? Because you have a different market. You have different rules. You have different places. And so in a way, they kind of hone in those skills. The only thing is, obviously, they have to learn their markets. For example, here's a prime example. If somebody who is so used to selling, for example, like the socks, you know, those cheap socks, would have to hone their skills in assessing what actually sells here. So they may they may decide after observing, and they're very keen in observing what people actually buy. They may decide, okay, maybe socks may not be the product that I should sell. What if I, looking at my market that passes me by, what if I look at cell phone covers? Maybe that would sell more, but they hone their entrepreneurial skills. To me, I believe. What happens when you formalize here? Many things happen, both good and bad. One is obviously when you formalize the informal sector here, it may become more expensive for the vendors because you have to pay for all these licenses. Those, for example, who are selling, and I know because I've interviewed some food truck vendors, you know, how often do they come, the FDA, the inspections, food inspectors? They come regularly, and you have to pay for your license. So in a way, it becomes more expensive when you formalize, but obviously the local governments say, but that's for the health, safety, and welfare of citizens so that they don't get sick with your food that you sell, for example. So there are ramifications of formalizing the informal sector. And I know Alvaro has a lot more to say about that here. So, Larissa?
Thank you very much. Larissa Preiser-Hoy, Interim Dean in the College of Business Administration. Thank you for a very inspiring conversation and sharing really your personal as well as professional journey as a scholar, as a researcher. As you look forward perhaps into the future and writing another book on leadership, could you share us maybe what have you learned from the process of doing this research and writing the book that you may do the same or different for the next book that you're contemplating on leadership with this decolonization lens?
Yeah, thanks. And as I said, it did start because I was collecting after this book. Before it was even published, I said, what's my second book? This one on leadership. So I started collecting a lot of leadership publications, materials, but I do see a gap. I do see a gap of leaders of color who write about leadership, and not just leaders of color who give us generic leadership advice, right? To me, again, that's why it's cultural identity is very important for any scholar, for any person, that if you know who you are and where you come from, what your values are, then again, going back to your question about leadership, it then reflects on your leadership style. So the writing, I will have to go again and really assess which of this leadership literature I would put in the book. Not only that, stories are very, very important. And so going back to all my emails and all these vignettes and anecdotes of stories and sort of the leadership response to those stories, I think is gonna be very important. Again, that's decolonization in a way, a decolonizing lens, because I will not just take theory because it's most cited, like Drucker, for example. I will take some, but I'll be very, very particular about what I take. So,
Okay, we have another question from online. The question's from Jenkins asking, can you explain a little bit more about transdisciplinary? Maybe give an example.
yeah. Okay, so again, I showed a graphic. To me, that graphic really represents what I mean by the difference between interdisciplinary, where there's a little overlapping, while transdisciplinary is really the blending, the stewing of thoughts and ideas. Here's another example. Aside from this, I had two studies about 4 years ago looking at active learning classrooms and whether a typical classroom like something like this would impact student outcomes compared to like maybe those type of desks, actually round desks, where in your classroom, active learning is you stand up, you go, the professor has certain exercises to get them to think, to interact with their fellow classmates, for example. What did I have as a team? I had a neurobiologist who, again, we had a lot of arguments about because she wanted our research design to be very precise. We had an architect who also argued, wait, it doesn't have to be that precise because what we need is data that would help us design it. You don't have to be exactly precise. And then, of course, me, and then we had an educational specialist who gave us ideas on how what metrics we should use for student success. And it was a stewing again of a lot of meetings and a lot of arguments. But at the end, we did come up with a solution of what an active learning classroom really is. Sort of a framework. That's the outcome of the transdisciplinary. And we found out that the more the students got out of their seats and moved around, it did help in their grades, in the ultimate final grades. You would think, how does that happen? Apparently, our neurobiologist team member said, in any organism, if you move, it helps with the brain. And so they're more motivated to learn. They're more motivated to be engaged in the exercise that the professor gave. So again, that's an example of a transdisciplinary team, and the outcome was a framework for active learning. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you very much for your time. I truly appreciate it. And watch for the second book. I don't know how many years from now, but there will be. Thank you.